Well, greetings, everyone. My name is Guy Dauncey. I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Shtenemuch and Shtuminus people on Vancouver Island. And I'm with the West Coast Climate Action Network, as you all know. Our guest today is Andrew van Iterson. Is that Iterson or Iterson, Andrew?
Iterson, thanks.
Iterson, okay. Andrew's been active on environmental issues for 30 years and has managed the Green Budget Coalition since 2005. He coordinates and mobilizes the coalition's efforts, helping its 23 member organizations to develop and reach agreement on their federal budget recommendations, organizing and leading meetings of members with senior government representatives and securing funding. Since 2005, the coalition has strengthened its annual budget submission, increased its government access, and consistently seen new funding and tax changes related to the coalition's recommendations in each annual federal budget. Over the past year, more than $21 billion has been announced supporting the coalition's recommendations. Andrew completed a master's degree in environmental studies in York University in 2005, focused on ecological fiscal reform. He was previously involved in community organizing around transportation and anti-poverty issues and international development. Away from the coalition, he enjoys his two vibrant teenagers. He cycles just about everywhere, including twice across BC and across the Rockies. And he takes the lead in making a community ice rink each winter in Ottawa, where he lives. And so, welcome, Andrew. As I explained to you, our context is that the BC government is inviting us to make submissions to our provincial budget with a deadline at the end of September. And we thought we'd draw on you for some advice and insight to get us all, learning some wisdoms as we go about this task. So I'm going to hand the floor over to you and feel free to take it away.
Thanks, Guy. Really appreciate that welcome. And appreciate all of you taking time to join us this evening. I'll just put some slides up on the screen here. Whoops. There we go. Can you all see that?
Yes, but you're showing all your background slides as well.
Okay, hold on a second.
Try again.
This one should work. How's that?
Yes, there we go. Perfect.
Okay, great. So the Green Budget Coalition is what I'd like to do today is give you a quick overview of the Green Budget Coalition because it's become a very effective vehicle in Ottawa on federal issues. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned from it. And then talk about some of the advice that I would have for you in writing submissions and trying to promote budget measures to the BC government. So in brief, the Green Budget Coalition was founded in 1999, and the story goes when Paul Martin was finance minister, he was at a pub with some environmentalists. I think Elizabeth May was one of them, and basically told them that they should get together and tell them how to green the budget. And thus the coalition was created. It includes 23 of Canada's leading national environmental groups, from Ducks Unlimited to Greenpeace, including some groups based in BC, the David Suzuki Foundation, Eco-Justice, and West Coast Environmental Law, and funded mostly by its members, but also foundations. And there's the full array of the coalition's members. Many familiar logos to many of you, I imagine. So why do we focus on the federal budget? I mean, the fact that you're joining me today suggests you probably understand the answer to that question, but the federal budget is usually the most important policy document of the year. It's where funding gets announced and tax changes, but that's true for every issue. And so for that reason, it's also the hardest to influence. And the finance department doesn't want to hear different things from 25 different groups. So we've become much more effective by providing one collective set of recommendations. I think as the climate and biodiversity crises get worse, the more that we can coordinate to ask for big budget allocations, the better. So this slide has a lot of detail, and I hope it doesn't look too busy, but it effectively summarizes how the coalition operates during the year. The federal budget is usually in March, and the coalition then meets in the first week of April, and this year it was delayed to the late April. And we discuss what our priorities will be for next year's budget, like 10 to 12 months down the road. And that involves, and then we start drafting a preliminary set of recommendations, which involves some informal consultation with the government officials. And we put together by early June a first draft, what we call our preliminary recommendations for budget 2022 right now. We send that widely across government, and then we meet with assistant deputy ministers in about 15 different departments and agencies, as well as with finance officials. And our intent at this stage is partly to give them advance notice of our recommendations, but also to hear their feedback on how we can strengthen our recommendations, what the gaps are, what the issues we aren't addressing, also how we can better align them with what the departments are asking for. Because the more the departments and us are asking for the same thing, the more effective we can be. And I think a related piece that I've learned is that I imagine that no matter how good our recommendations are, unless a government official has a reason to read them, they may not, because they have 100 different things they need to, but because they need to write a briefing note, therefore they need to read our document. And so because of the briefing note needing to happen, there's tens of hours that go into reading our document in each department. So after we have all these meetings with department officials in June, early July, we then step back and take into consideration all the feedback we've heard and revise and finalize our recommendations and translate them and create a beautiful document led by Roger Handling in BC. Some of you may know, produces our beautiful document now. And then in September, when we release it, we then have a second round of meetings at the political level with ministers, political advisors, the Prime Minister's office, leaders and MPs from all the different parties. And what we're particularly trying to do at that point is have, in the federal government, and I imagine it's similar in BC, is that each of the line ministers writes a letter to the finance minister saying what they want in the budget. And most of what goes into the federal budget comes from those letters from the department ministers. So in BC, it would be like the Minister of Energy and Climate Change, Minister of Agriculture. So we meet with them before they write those letters and try to get them to include in their letters what we're asking for. And that in October really drives our whole annual cycle. And then once those letters have gone in, then we meet with the finance minister and promote key recommendations that we can sense still have potential for the next year's budget. So that's a lot, but that is in essence our annual cycle based around the preliminary and a final set of recommendations. And just in real life, pre-COVID, this is what we look like. This was March 9th, 2020. We met with Finance Minister Morneau. Some of you may recognize some of those faces in that photo. 4 days later, the world shut down. And when in that meeting, there was supposed to be they were expecting a budget in weeks, which never happened for another year. And just to give you a sense of what the coalition asked for, these were our final recommendations for last year. And there's about 50 recommendations in the document, but we try to feature 3 to 5 because we sense that in a meeting, most MPs, ministers can only take in so much. So last year we asked for $10 billion for building retrofits, $5 billion for green transportation, and also funding for nature-based climate solutions and protected areas. And then there were about 40 other recommendations that we gave less prominence to. And just a little more detail on the climate side, here's a list of some of the other recommendations. We had recommendations on fossil fuel subsidies, on small modular reactors, renewable energy, just transition, international climate finance. So a comprehensive set of recommendations. And as Guy mentioned, there was huge impacts over the past year. And we don't pretend to be the only reason that these impacts happen. There's people such as probably all of you and others across Canada that have been sending in letters and creating pressure as well. But collectively, there was over $21 billion in funding over the past year that advanced what the coalition was asking for, including $6 billion on retrofits and funding for transportation, nature-based climate solutions, and protected areas. And some of the lessons we've learned over the years include that persistence is really important. Sometimes it can take years and years to get success on what would seem like the most obvious opportunity. Relationships with people all across government are very beneficial. And then prioritizing recommendations. Every year when we meet with finance, we go in with our 50 recommendations and they say, well, what's number one? What are your top three? And then complementary efforts from, there's so many different players in the political world, and I imagine you all have come to realize this. So the individual environmental groups have influence, the bureaucrats do, the MPs do, the political staff, finance, and the more that you can get the different players on side and supporting your recommendation, the better. And then that there's short-term budget opportunities and there's longer-term ideas. So our document has a mix of things that we really want to see in budget 22 and other things that are more like ideas that we're starting to germinate. Something like well-being budgeting was something we had in last year's document, and it's something we're building towards, led by the David Suzuki Foundation. Turning to your task at hand, the BC climate emergency and how to influence BC's funding. So my first comment might be the opposite of what you're expecting from me. I would just say that keep in mind that if you only write a submission to the finance department, to the pre-budget submission, and don't do anything else, it may not have a lot of influence. To be influential, you really need to complement it with other efforts, such as mobilizing public support and engaging with government departments. And this is more valid for organizations that have some capacity or connections. But that said, if I'm writing a written submission, just here are some ideas. First of all, I think you really want to have specific recommendations. How much money are you asking for, over how many years, to do what? And keep in mind, as Guy said, it sounds like they're getting hundreds of submissions. So the people reading these, their eyes may be glazing over. Make what it is you're asking for really visible in the document. And finance people, they want to see, they talk about 2-fers and 3-fers. They want to see job benefits and economic benefits. That's always drives decisions within government. And are there other benefits to your recommendations? Are there nature conservation benefits? Are there health benefits? Do they help benefit low-income communities? Do they benefit rural communities? I heard mention of that at the start of this call. And to the extent that you can include examples of where these ideas are working elsewhere, and if you can reference the economic benefits, everything that brings more credibility. To the extent that other organizations support those recommendations, that again, if the whole West Coast Climate Action Network all supports them, that strengthens them. If there's any polling that says the British Columbians support these ideas, those are all, I think, going to help you. A few more pieces. If you're asking for more funding than what is there already, it's really important to acknowledge the funding that's there. And especially if there's been new funding recently, a state appreciation for it, and then explain why the new funding you're asking for is needed and how it complements what's there. Because if all you do is if all we do as a coalition is ask for more new funding, I think the bureaucrat reads it and says, well, don't they realize we already have funding for this program? And that might be the last time they look at your request. So it's really important to show that you understand what's already there. Again, if you're making a lot of recommendations, I think it's important to consider prioritizing a few of them. If you could have a few, what are the ones you really want? And again, as guys working on, and maybe you're all working on, aligning with other environmental groups, the more that finance hears complementary, similar messaging from more people, the more effective you're going to be. And perhaps groups can submit recommendations together, or at least make sure that they're kind of on the same wavelength and that your numbers aren't out of whack. Because I imagine if they get 10 submissions on renewable energy and one of them asks for 10% of the money that the others do, they'll be tempted to fund the 10% one and not the higher ones. And then broadly back to government engagement. I mean, if you have the capacity to be meeting with government, the finance department's really important. And broadly, if you have the capacity, the time to do what we do, which is meet with government officials first with a draft, and then refine it, and then meet with ministers and political staff, I mean, that can be very effective in our experience, but I realize you've limited time here. But the finance department's very important to meet with. And then, as you would know, the environment and climate change, energy, forests, jobs and economic recovery. It may not be the first one that comes to mind, but I think they're going to have a lot of say in where the funding goes, because that's a lot of votes are driven by where the jobs are created. So if you can speak to that agenda, you'll have more influence. And naturally, meeting with all the different parties, and if there's any MLAs that you think can be particularly influential on driving the agenda, you'd want to meet with them too. And as I mentioned, I think that meeting with departments, even requesting meetings, securing meetings, motivates the officials to read your document, where potentially before that they would not have. I sometimes wonder if the most important part of a meeting is just that the department reads your document, and that the meeting itself is just going through the motions. Public mobilization. Imagine you've all done this in different areas. It's one of the key lessons the coalition learned. For years and years, we produced really strong recommendations and we weren't as effective. And what we heard back is that there was no risk to the government of not implementing what we asked for. There was nobody getting angry. Nobody really, nobody beyond the little bubble noticed. But if the public is demanding action, particularly in a cohesive way around specific pieces, then you're going to be much more effective. And I heard Guy talk about an effort to ask for 2% of GDP to be invested for climate action. That seems like a great, simple piece that a lot of different organizations could promote and try to collectively get the public to get on board for. Or and if you had a specific dollar amount, similarly, that would work well. And we try to do that with the coalition's recommendations, to come up with just one high level, like $15 billion on climate, $10 billion on nature, and then our member groups ask their members to make that ask to the finance minister. That is a quick overview of the coalition and some high level advice. I hope that was helpful and balance being too much and too little. I'm happy to respond to any questions, and I also imagine maybe there's discussion amongst yourselves that could be beneficial in moving yourselves ahead.
So, wow, Andrew, that's fantastic. I've made a whole bunch of notes, and I'm pretty sure other people have too. If you want to see sharing, we can see each other again. There's so much 15 years of good experience really shows. You've been doing your homework there. Can I do a quick round of questions? At this point, we can either stop recording so we can just have free discussion openly among ourselves, and then the main presentation is recorded, or we go on recording so that people can see our discussions. Well, anyone, hands up for those who would like to stop recording at this point, or hands up, I think it's useful to carry on. People can see the whole discussion. If you're happy with carrying on, then we'll just carry on recording. And if you want to share your screen so we can see you, who you are, because we now have to dig into some good discussion among ourselves. But to get things going, a couple of questions for Andrew. If they are asking for written submissions with a deadline of September 15th, at what stage do you think we're at in terms of the letters going from the line ministers to the ministers to the finance minister? At what stage in the process are we here in BC? Is it likely similar?
I mean, I'd just be speculating. I've heard that it's varied by months in the federal government over the years, so I would just.
Our budget is normally, if I'm right, end of February, March, when it normally shows up.
Yeah, I mean, October seems like the logical time for that, but it could easily be a month or two, one way or the other. I mean, I imagine one of you must have a friend in a minister's office, and I would suggest calling them, and maybe they could.
And my second question before we open it up to everyone else is, when you say on a multi-year budget, how important is that you have a 5-year ask or a 10-year ask? That's quite, I mean, I see the Biden administration does that all the time, but is that normal in BC, as in a province as well?
Again, I'm not an expert on the provincial scene. I think the federal government tends to look at a 5-year lens. There have recently been announcements over 10 years, which is invaluable in that climate issues need a longer term effort, but they can also be meaningless because within 5 years there'll be a new government and all that funding can be canceled.
So let's just go straight into open questions first. If you're down the bottom, you'll see the button called reactions, when you can raise your hand like I just done there. And then I can see who'd like to speak, and then you can lower it when you've finished. And so let's have a period of 10 minutes of just get your thoughts out and questions to Andrew, and then we'll start strategizing and how we can handle this thing ourselves. Who wants to go first? Don't all rush. Eric, yes. And you have to unmute yourself and introduce yourself briefly so we all get to know each other. Thanks, Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric Dougherty. I'm hoping that my internet connection will work. I'm coming to you from Lone Butte, BC, in the smoke right now. But normally I live in Victoria. I'm a member of Climate Justice Victoria, the Better Transit Alliance, and active with a number of other groups. And I'm really interested in, I saw the number of $5 billion on transportation on the federal piece there. And a number of people in BC have been working on the issue of reallocating money away from highway expansion to transit. And, today we just got an announcement of a $4 billion urban highway expansion project in Metro Vancouver from the provincial government. I'm really interested in this this idea of, and I'd actually say it's 10 years now since the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives and the Wilderness Committee came out with one of a report, Transportation Transformation, talking about shifting the money away from highway expansion to public transit, walking and cycling. And I just want your comments on that idea in specific, and also the concept of shifting money away from the harms to fund the good stuff, including the job creation, the health benefits, all that stuff that goes along with it.
Thanks, Eric. Andrew.
I like that question, Eric. Thanks. That idea is dear to my heart, and I spent years working on my master's degree special paper was all about tax shifting and shifting taxes from goods onto bads. The coalition spent years promoting ideas along those lines, and what we effectively heard from finance over and over again was, if we hear about a good idea, we can find money to fund it. And if we want to cancel a program, we can figure out what we're going to do with that money. And they were not at all interested in, here, we'll reallocate this money from A to B. It doesn't, and it's unfortunately, so for us, it doesn't seem to be an idea that works. And it's tempting sometimes to say, like, we hear the DFO, maybe, there might be spending in a department that's not going very well, and we want to say, don't spend it that way. Here's a better way to spend it. But my experience is, if you tell them where money is being badly spent, they might cut it, but they're not. You can't count on them to then reallocate that funding to where you want it to go. So I like the idea at the federal scene. The government isn't keen on it.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah,
Laura's next, and then Richard. Not Richard.
That looks like Margaret there. Wrong name. Yeah, thanks. Actually, just talking about reallocation made me think of a question. We did a submission, oral submission of several years back as well, around, part of it was around fossil fuel subsidies. And you had mentioned subsidies in your thing. And we didn't get much of we felt like the finance committee wasn't necessarily the place that was received super well. It didn't end up in the final report, for example. And I was just wondering if you had any advice on the best messaging for subsidies, because that's how we were going to try to frame it, is instead of spending your money this way, let's spend it this way. It creates more jobs and does, all those other co-benefits. So yeah, so any ideas would be great on your experiences federally.
That's a good question. I mean, I think part of what that speaks to me is I would suggest trying to meet with the government officials at finance and talk to them and hear from them what are the reasons why they're not advancing on that. I would say I again used to talk about how we should shift fossil fuel subsidies to other issues, but I mean, fossil fuel subsidies tend to be reduced income taxes effectively, or royalties. And if cutting the subsidy worked, the oil and gas activity wouldn't happen, and there'd be a lot less revenues. So that cutting that subsidy is not going to generate revenues. It might actually reduce revenues. So saying that we should shift fossil fuel subsidies to other areas, unless they're like direct financial payments that are going to continue regardless. We risk looking naive by saying that, because that money may not be there, and it may in fact cost the Treasury money to reduce fossil fuel subsidies.
Thanks. Margaret, go ahead.
It's kind of a related question, because I guess we're wondering how practical it is to get into policy rather than strictly numbers. Do you find these committees are interested at all in hearing your policy suggestions? Obviously not in regard to subsidies, but we're going to be addressing their funding for municipalities for climate action. Right now, the current program is suspended and they haven't introduced what they're going to do. But we'd like to suggest right now, money that comes from the carbon tax to municipalities can be spent on anything. You can build a baseball diamond if you want to. We feel it should be spent on climate action. That's really a policy thing rather than talking about dollars and cents. Are those kinds of things welcomed at all, or not?
I imagine there's more of a window at the provincial level than the federal level. The federal Finance Committee, I think, just gets swamped by hundreds and hundreds of submissions on a huge array of issues. And I mean, they're welcome.
I'm thinking of this current BC coming up.
I think high level suggestions have an opportunity to get into the committee's report, and you never know who might look at them and be influenced by them. I mean, I imagine they're going to have more resonance if they hear that from a number of people. It's always possible there's someone on the committee who reads that and thinks, this is a great idea, I'm going to run with that, and then follows up with you. I don't, in my experience, I mean, because the Finance Committee gets so many submissions, the odds of a submission being pivotal and driving a change are low on their own.
Thanks. Brian.
Thanks, Andrew. Very good presentation and concise. I'm curious about the process you go through. You have a couple of dozen groups that you are a coalition of, each with their own agendas and their own plans. Do you go back to them and sort of get permission or guidance as to that your draft submission is correct, or do you just kind of go on your own?
Oh, it's a long, many-month process, day after day after day after day. Our document is largely written by the members. All of our recommendations are written by the members. There's roughly 50 people from the 23 groups who are involved in writing our recommendation. And if you go to our web, the latest version, we have a preliminary set of recommendations for budget 2022, which you can see on our website. And so there's roughly 50 people involved in drafting those recommendations, and some recommendations are written by one person and no one else really knows anything about it and they just trust them, and other recommendations are written by 10 people, and there's there's phone conversations and discussions. And I mean, I'm always impressed by the level of positive rapport and how well people cooperate and listen to each other and find common ground is really impressive. But occasionally there are, it's harder to write a budget recommendation than a policy piece, because we need to agree on numbers. And one group might want to ask for 200 million and the other might want to ask for 20. And so we have to agree. But I've been impressed consistently that we've been able to find common ground on them. But sometimes at the very last minute, we're debating over the footnote in the protected areas recommendation about which 3 protected possible new parks we're going to agree on and highlight. So it's a many-month process of drafting it all.
Thanks. Back to you, Margaret.
I was going to ask the group how many people had intended to try to address subsidies in their presentation. And a discussion on whether that's real, how realistic that is. Okay, just a couple of us.
Well, I would think that everyone's going to have it at least as a line item.
Great.
The question is how much detail they go and how they handle it, because what we're learning is it doesn't work to say, please transfer the subsidies to other programs. That's just not the way the finance brains work. But it's top of the agenda for almost all of us, I think, among other things.
Could you give us some advice perhaps on how to approach it? And by the way, I guess when you were presenting the idea of subsidies, it's, as you know, it's been shown that they're spending way more on subsidies than they're getting in royalties. So that argument of not getting losing out, I'm not sure that that's applicable. But anyway, if you could give us some advice on how to approach that subject. Thank you.
Andrew.
I think one piece would be to be really specific about which subsidies you want removed. I think that would help a lot. And I also sense that a key piece is the no new subsidies angle. And to the extent that you sense that there's certain subsidies, such as an LNG, that might be pending, to be specific about what the new subsidies that you're opposed to. So it's really clear to them what you're opposing, and they can't pretend that that there is an opposition. I have some faith that, you know, multiple organizations and individuals opposing fossil fuel subsidies will lead to a reduction in new subsidies, and we will never know about that benefit because we won't see it. But I think there is purely the message in itself is helpful. But be as concrete as possible. And you can mention, I mean, I don't know if the province cares about Canada's G7 commitment about phasing out inefficient subsidies. But
So one of the strengths of being a network is that we're gradually getting to know what all the other groups are doing. And Stand.earth has clearly taken the lead on the subsidies. So they did that big report spelling out the number. I would assume that whoever did that has dug in enough to know what the best recommendations are. So to me, the obvious thing would be to take the lead from them, to ask them the question, so then we can all be on the same page as to what the clear ask on that one piece is. I think the challenge for us as a group is to say, okay, are there just 5 or 6 big pieces we all want to focus on? And then how do we reach consensus on each of them? And then I have a second question to put to Andrew, is there more strength, given that we're not like you, we haven't been meeting for 15 years, we're not going to have all that wonderful list of meetings. Is there more strength in having one submission which has got a whole bunch of sign-ons? Or is it better to have 10 submissions which are basically asking the same things without any attempt to have the same phraseology around those things, so that it seems like they're reading different things, even if the number asks are the same? What do you think?
I was wondering about that earlier today. And I guess it depends on the individuals in your government and how they're going to react. I think I could go either way on that. I don't have a simple answer for you on that, but I think in either case, what you do want is some simple messages that all of the groups are asking their members to communicate.
Yeah.
So that
Okay, let's go to Sue and then Susan. Sue.
Hi, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm in a very noisy spot outside. A few of us are doing verbal presentations, so we have 5 minutes. And I'm just wondering, you know, in terms of instead of a written presentation, if you have any suggestions for how to be most effective.
Pick a few key messages, start with them, emphasize, provide some detail on them, and conclude with them again. Imagine that if they're seeing 100 submissions, their minds are glazing over. So if you can leave them with a few things and then present, you know, summarize them up front, provide as much credible support for them in the middle, and then summarize them again at the end.
Cool. Thanks. Susan. You have to you go. Start again. Now you're unmuted. Yeah. We're not hearing you, Susan, at all, actually. There's no sound coming through. You're muted again now, so it's not your muting, it's something. You're muted now. Now you're not. So try. Nope, it's not working. If you put it in the chat, I'll read it out. Okay? Yeah. Anyone else got questions or thoughts?
I had a couple follow-up comments, Guy. I mean, on fossil fuel subsidies, when we made progress in the federal level, part of what the coalition was doing was making specific recommendations, and we were meeting with, at the time, Minister Flaherty's staff and building credibility for the message. So coming in with the kind of research that you mentioned that's been done, bringing in the people who know the issue inside out, and into the finance minister's office and having those discussions so that the key staff people there who are influential are seeing and discussing that information and give it credibility. Because generally, I think the finance minister's office tends to be skeptical to the no fossil fuel subsidy message. But if you can come in and sound credible and intelligent and bring in information that backs it up, that's a really important piece, complemented by hopefully thousands of emails from the outside. And the other thing is that, I mean, I mentioned meeting with departments, but with this finance committee submissions, maybe you can meet with the finance committee chair and some of the key finance committee members. And then again, they're going to read your submission and pay more attention to what you're asking for.
Would that best be done before or after the deadline of September 30th? Because before September 30th, they might say, just put it in writing, do a submission. But if it's after, they might have a different mind frame.
I would say I mean, my first inclination is anytime they agree to meet with you. You can say we're written it down, but we'd also like to talk about it in detail because there's a lot more details that we could like to explain to you.
Yeah. Okay.
I also think if they are doing hearings for days and days and days, once they're doing that, they won't have very little time to meet with you.
Susan, do you want to try your mic again? Nope, not working for you. Go to chat and we'll be your voice. Any other questions for Andrew before so we need to, I mean, other questions may come up. What we need to resolve is how we support each other through the network in making submissions. I know that Laura, Margaret, Brian, and Sue are planning to make submissions. Let's go around. Aileen, are you with a group that's planning to make a submission? You have to unmute when I call your name.
I'm with Drawdown BC, and that isn't something we've discussed at this point.
Okay.
But certainly we'll consider it.
Yeah. Brian, and then I'll go to Susan Belford. Brian, are you considering doing anything?
I'm considering it. Basically, it came up as being, you've got 2 days to make a request. And I thought, well, I'll throw my name in there. It's always easy to drop out afterwards.
Yeah.
And tonight I'm listening to what's going on to see whether or not I'm going to. So I'm still on the fence.
Okay. Susan Belford, you're muted. Yeah. And I love your Japanese screen behind you. Right?
I'm not personally planning on making a submission, but there are 3 of us from Transition Souk here, and maybe Transition Souk may be thinking about making a submission. I don't know, but I'm attending to see if there's any way that I can support people in the doing of this thing.
Thanks. Claire and David, what are your thoughts around this?
I'm not sure. I have to get back to my group. We actually just finished making a submission to the Clean BC Act, which took some work.
Yeah.
So that has been sent off, and I'm watching this tonight to get back to my group for a Sunday meeting.
So as far as Claire's group is concerned, for our kids, they can act fairly quickly, but we're also part of the Lutheran, we're on the Lutheran Climate Action Committee for the BC Synod, the Lutheran Church. And it moves fairly slowly. I don't think we could get everybody heading in the same direction, but we'll take it to them and suggest it to them, and maybe next budget we might be ready for it.
Yeah. Jane, calling on you. Is anyone from the South Island Climate Action Network thinking about this, do you know?
No, I don't
Okay.
think we have the capacity. I think we're working on an all candidates debate, and that's going to take a lot of our time up.
Yeah, for sure. Gidget, and I sound embarrassed saying that, but you're up as Gidget. Calling Gidget. And if there's no Gidget, oh, Eva Garofalo.
Oh, she was muted. Yeah.
Yes, Gidget, hi there, yes.
Hello there.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi.
Are you thinking of, go ahead.
I would ask to Dean. I work with Broke I'm in Surrey though. Is Dean McGuckin is here?
It's actually, it's hard to hear what you're saying. If you can, yeah.
It's unlikely.
Can't hear you.
I'm doing other actions to try to draw more public attention towards this and increase the direct action rather than lobbying from the government. I do think that it's very important that we develop participatory processes that really engage large numbers of folks. And I also think that it would be important to reach out to Iron and Earth and have a message that we can take to workers directly as we're doing actions. We're in the streets. We're finding a lot of hostility from unions and workers. And so I feel like it would be good to have facts that we can approach these workers with specifically.
So I'm hearing you saying that it needs to be a participatory process and including reaching out to workers, and I think that was unions. It's we only caught half of what you were saying. Ava, do you want to unmute and share your thoughts?
For sure, thanks. The question is just if submitting comments.
Yeah, were you thinking of doing a submission? Are you engaged in this, or just curious?
Yes, I absolutely will be. I work for an organization called My Sea to Sky. I know you know Tracy as well.
Tracy, yes.
So we'll be submitting comment and encouraging our volunteers to do the same. Originally, we were going to go with the video because that's more engaging for volunteers. But after hearing what Andrew said, I'm a little bit hesitant because I don't want them to scan over it so quickly. But yeah, we'll primarily be focusing on ending fossil fuel subsidies, with focusing on how it will benefit northern communities as well as Indigenous sovereignty. I don't know if everyone knows about the issues that's going on with Oil and Gas Committee, the First Nations Oil and Gas Committee right now, but yeah, that's what we'll be doing.
Okay, thanks. Susan's saying, in my work, the big ask is for the provincial government, this is Susan Clark, the big ask is for the provincial government to transfer sufficient funds to meet the municipal climate action plans. In Souk, for example, meeting our greenhouse gas target means providing heat pumps and electric vehicles in all homes over the next 9 years. And how would Souk, as a municipality, approach the government? Now, there's a question. Andrew, any experience on how a municipality can wade in on this one?
I mean, at the federal level, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities approaches the federal government at a large scale, but at a provincial level, I imagine there's a Ministry of Municipal Affairs.
We have a Union of BC municipalities, and they have a process for getting inputs that basically closed off last March because it's, you got deadlines. So they've probably already got their list of accepted proposals for their convention in November all cut and dried already. But an individual municipality can still make a submission apart from that, right?
Certainly. I would in part go through the MLA if the MLA is a government MLA.
The MLA in Souk is our premier.
Seems like it might be hard to get a meeting, but he'd be influential if you could. I'd be sending him a letter. I mean, I think Souk should, if I was Souk, I would certainly be sending him a letter and trying to get a meeting to discuss that, and also contacting the ministers of whichever relevant environment minister would be, and there must be a minister of municipal affairs, something like that.
So you're suggesting the actual mayor and one or two other people would ask for that meeting with the premier, with their MLA premier, right?
I think that would make sense. I mean, I'm not familiar with Souk and how Souk operates and how they do their government relations, but probably, or certainly a senior.
Yeah. Okay. Laura, I assumed you were making a submission. I'm coming back to you now. What's your thoughts about how you're making the submission?
Yeah, well, we are doing like an in-person on Zoom because we applied and got that. And then we'll also do a written one as sort of to complement that. But we are still honing, we just haven't had a lot of time. We basically said, yeah, we wanna we wanna do something around, well, sort of similar to what Susan was just talking about, was the, rural communities are really strapped for money, and there's really ambitious climate targets for communities to meet with no real resources. So we want to have something real specific there. Also on active transportation on rural highways specifically, considering, as well as regional transit, which is a big issue as well, as far as co-benefits on many different fronts. So those are the kind of things that we were thinking, just of 3 things. I looked at the document we were working on, and I see the person I was working on it added more, and so now there's like 6 or 7. So we're going to have to go through and trim that off to just have those few points, because we only have 5 minutes.
The more people you get in a group, the longer the list gets, because everyone's got their favorite things to add.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Done that.
Yeah. So we're just going to try to be specific. I appreciated Andrew's, do your homework, make sure that you know where you're coming from. But if others are doing submissions, something similar, it would be really great if we share, like, who's digging into the current finance, current budget, and where things are, or we can share what we find.
Yeah, and Sue Kirschman, going back to you, what kind of submission, or how were you thinking of doing it?
Very much similar to what Laura was saying. We were looking at buildings, addressing the need for funds in the local municipality for retrofits, etc. And one other item that some people were talking about was communication, and improving communication about climate change, asking the government to put some funds into that. I think those are the 2 biggies that I'm looking at right now. And we just have the 5 minutes. I'll be doing it at the same time as Margaret with the BC Climate Alliance, and was it Stand Earth, I believe, and See the Sky. So the 4 of us could perhaps coordinate what we're all going to say.
You mean you're all at the same session?
Yeah, so we have 20 minutes total, 5 minutes each.
Oh, that's great. That's good. Margaret, anything to chip in there?
No, it'll be a similar pitch to maintain or actually increase funding to municipalities.
So it's clear that the 4 of you need to coordinate your message internally as a little bubble of 4. And you might have some really good stuff that we can share with other people and groups then. Because we've got to bear in mind that we got a mailing list of 700 people, and we'll have 160 groups that are now actual members. All of those groups, if they had a written submission that made it easy, they can send it off. So we do the homework for them. My question is, do those of us who are, given that it's federal election and we got a lot of people are doing a lot of other things, is it worth having just even one meeting between us, those who are keen to get on the same page with things? How soon is your meeting, Margaret and Sue? What's the date?
September the 3rd, and I had, it was my intention to email the other people. We do have contact emails for the other 3, or the other 2 rather, to talk about messaging, because, for instance, if Stand Earth will obviously do a very good job talking about subsidies, we could just mention it in a sentence or 2 rather than spending a lot of time on it. And then get on to our issues. So yeah, it was our intention to coordinate, and could be by Zoom.
So if we...
Did you want to have a role in doing that, Guy?
Did I want to have a what?
Did you want to have a role in getting the groups together, or just?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, definitely. I'm thinking if we were to meet again next Wednesday, the 1st, at the same time, 5 o'clock, for 1 hour tight, and we could be quite targeted and get on the same page around. Because rural, we are in our solutions team, we've got to focus on transportation, and one of the things coming up there is the idea of a BC-wide bus service, particularly for remote and rural communities. So everyone's lined up, and so is the Union of BC Indian Chiefs. So they're asking for the same thing. So that's it may be a winnable task, that one, right? And if we get on the same page around the subsidies, and I'm very keen on climate communications personally, but where's the brochure? And then we all get a brochure on COVID, like, where is it? And on retrofits, we just take some key pieces and don't try to bite off everything.
Next Wednesday's good for me.
I'm choosing it because we can all make it right now. Laura's putting a thumb up. So in terms of can you put all your emails in the chat? Then I can just communicate with those instead of I might send out a general thing, but as well. But anyone who wants to join us this time on 5 o'clock next Wednesday for a working session, and it'll probably just be one off, because you have to go 2 days later. You got, your actual written, your personal submission. Susan, Clark, your hand is still up. That may be an old hand. That's okay. Yeah. Anyone can just free to jump in if they got any. I'll look at in the chat. We've got Margaret and Susan Belford. Anyone else who wants to join us on that, so we can just put some detailed attention in. And if someone wants in advance to reach out to the people at stand.earth to get whoever their who can take on that. Margaret, you can do that. That'd be great. Just find out what their pitch is on the subsidies, so they can do that bit of the homework for us. On the communications bit is quite easy because it's not an expensive budget ask. Even if they just put $1 million into a sort of community communications program to do reach out, that would be a beginning things. The bus service needs pricing. If it's what does it cost to have a BC-wide, really reliable service? So Eric, do you have numbers around that kind of cost, what it might look like to really expand a proper BC-wide transit service serving all remote, rural and Indigenous First Nations communities?
No, we don't have solid numbers on that, but there is. We're working through the city of Victoria. A few of the councillors are interested in basically getting this funded, applying for funding to do a study of that exact issue. And just in case anybody hadn't flipped through the federal NDP platform, highway bus service is on the federal NDP's campaign platform.
Right. Laura, you had your hand up?
Right. So when we're giving a oral presentation, we also have the option of sending things in advance for them to look at before the presentation. So yeah, time is tight, but if there's something that can help maybe make us more credible when we have our 5-minute pitch, that's something that I think we have to get. Margaret, do you remember, or Sue, is it a week in advance that they need it? Yeah, no, so there's not a whole lot of time.
It's a Friday, right?
Yeah, so the 3rd is, the 3rd is a Friday. Yeah, so by the 27th, if we could get them something, if there was something within our collective asks, that would help. But it's not necessary, so.
So I realized I suppose I'm a week out. I suggested a meeting in 2 weeks' time, didn't I? On the 1st of September.
Oh gosh, did you suggest the 1st? I've already thought you said the 25th.
Yeah, I did mean that. I did mean next week, the 25th. That clashes with Lily's municipal committee, but that's okay. I meant next week, the 25th. Yeah.
Okay.
That's what I think other people signed up for. Yeah. Andrew, a bit of advice here. I mean, my brain is split on these things. My climate emergency hat says fund it right now. And then the practical reasonable hat says, if we want to get a BC-wide bus service, put the funding in for a study to report back by so-and-so date. And then you've got the transportation engineers getting on board. What's anyone think about that, Andrew included? Which way do we go?
I would be inclined to talk to all the different stakeholders and see where people are at. We had a discussion on this in the Green Budget Coalition and we couldn't land on it, whether you want to invest a huge amount of money in a bus service, whether you want to take Uber and just upscale. And we have cars driving on all these roads, right? Could we just create a safe way of people ride sharing? If you want to, that's the lowest emission way to do it.
Well, definitely.
But so it depends if everybody, like if all the stakeholders are on board with one proposal, then you could ask for money for it. But if there isn't consensus on that, then it's less likely to get funded in the short term.
Eric, any wisdom on that choice?
Yeah, there's solid consensus on bus system as the way to go,
you're
for
breaking up.
a
Stop.
whole bunch of different reasons. I'll try
No, you're really breaking up.
again without the video. There's very solid consensus that a bus service.
Yeah, and you got cut off. So it's
But there's consensus. It seems like something worth asking for. My experience is there's a lot of political support for it, as I was hearing, from you, right? Even the conservatives like it.
I mean,
the rural base, indigenous communities, women.
they're very strong for it. Asking for a study can easily be a cop out, that they spend 2 years doing the study and then conclude it's too expensive and you've wasted 2 years, right? Yeah.
Do a trial run.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got the emails of those who want to join us next week. Why don't we just, anything else for right now that we want to do or share? And there's
I had two other suggestions that came to mind. One is, if anyone who's making an oral presentation to the committee, I think it's worth your while to send something on paper to the committee in advance. I imagine their staff will read it.
Yeah.
That will be your lingering impact, will be whatever you send to them.
So the other big piece we haven't talked about is the biodiversity need, which is to protect 30% of BC's land and water by 2030. BC government's not even thinking about it. We're currently on 17% of land protected and like 3% of water. And the relevance for climate is that the climate crisis is not caused by our emissions, but by our accumulated emissions. And to suck those emissions back down to earth, we've got to protect biodiversity, nature, forests, and change farming. So the two agendas really intersect completely. And so putting that 30% of protected land into the budget, that needs money. There's going to be, it's a request for additional parks protection and stuff like that. It's quite a big budget. And I know there's a group called the Friends of BC Parks who might have been doing some thinking around this. Maybe I should touch base with them. It's easy to separate the two climate and biodiversity agendas for the peace of mind, but it's a really wrong thing to do. I know we need to embrace them both, equally, right? Yeah. Okay, well, it's 9 o'clock Andrew's time. Thank you.
Did Andrew get to say his second thing? Because he had two things.
I missed out on, my goodness, Andrew.
Thanks a lot. The other thing is, if you have any friends on the finance committee, like you get 5 minutes or whatever for your talk, but at the federal finance committee, each MP gets maybe 3 to 5 minutes of their own time. So if you have a friendly MLA on that committee, and they agree to ask you a soft question on your favorite topic, then you get bonus 3 to 5 minutes to talk on it. So
does anyone know off the top which MLAs are on the finance committee? Can someone do that homework before next Wednesday's meeting? It's only a matter of, okay, Susan, that'd be great. Thank you. Just go to the government website and find out who the MLAs are on. Yeah. There's a good chance that some of us are going to know them personally. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, thanks everyone. Thanks Andrew for giving us this time, because really your experience is really invaluable. We're all feel like newbies. Yeah, 15-year experience shows. So I'm going to thank everyone. I will share this on YouTube as well when I've done all the processing, and we will meet at the same time. I'll send a link out to you all, those who've given the emails, this time next week. You're going to press the red button and say goodbye to everyone. Thanks, everyone. Okay, bye-bye. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Guy.
everyone, thanks.
Thanks, Andrew.